Marcus Reed wiped the grease from his hands and looked out across the junkyard that had become his second home. Twisted metal and broken machinery stretched as far as the eye could see, the remnants of humanity's expansion into space. Ships that had carried dreams to distant stars now sat rusting under Earth's sun, their hulls cracked and their engines silent forever. As the chief mechanic for Henderson Salvage, Marcus had seen every type of vessel imaginable. Military cruisers with their armor plating stripped away, civilian transports that had carried families to new worlds, even a few alien vessels that had been captured during various conflicts. Each piece of scrap told a story, and Marcus had learned to read those stories in the bend of metal and the scorch marks on hull plating. Today was different, though. The morning had brought news that made even the hardened salvage workers nervous. A new arrival was being delivered, something that the military wanted disposed of quickly and quietly. The transport team had refused to give details, only saying that it was dangerous and should be processed for scrap immediately. Just break it down fast and don't ask questions, Henderson had told his crew during the morning briefing. The military wants this thing gone and they're paying triple rates for speed and discretion. Marcus watched the massive transport truck rumble through the yard's gates, its reinforced trailer covered in warning signs and radiation symbols. The vehicle moved slowly, as if its cargo was both precious and terrifying. Behind it came two military escorts, their weapons clearly visible and their faces hidden behind reflective visors. The unloading process was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The military personnel used remote-controlled machinery to move the cargo, keeping their distance as if proximity alone was dangerous. What emerged from the trailer made even experienced salvage workers step back in alarm. The thing was enormous, easily 15 meters long and shaped like no vehicle Marcus had ever seen. Its surface was covered in what looked like organic plating, dark and scarred with patches that seemed to pulse with faint internal light. Twisted appendages extended from its sides, some ending in grasping claws while others terminated in devices that could have been weapons or tools. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tommy Chen, one of the younger workers. "What is that thing?" "Alien bioship," said the military supervisor, his voice muffled by his helmet's communication system. "Crashed on Kepler 442b 3 months ago. Our xenobiology team studied it as much as they could, but it's too dangerous to keep around. The neural activity is too high and it keeps trying to interface with our computer systems." Marcus frowned as he studied the creature more closely, because that's what it was, he realized. Not a ship, but a living being. The organic plating wasn't armor, it was skin. The appendages weren't mechanical arms, they were limbs. And those patches of light weren't equipment malfunctions, they were bioluminescent organs. "You're talking about it like it's a machine," Marcus said, stepping closer despite the warnings. "Stay back," barked the supervisor. "That thing killed 12 researchers before we managed to sedate it. It's hostile, aggressive, and completely unpredictable. Our orders are to have it dismantled and incinerated within 48 hours. But Marcus wasn't listening to the warnings anymore. He was listening to something else entirely. As he moved closer to the creature, he could hear a sound that the others seemed to miss. It was faint, almost inaudible beneath the rumble of machinery and the shouting of workers. But it was there, a low rhythmic vibration that sounded almost like crying. "It's in pain," Marcus said quietly. "It's sedated," the supervisor corrected. "The neural suppressors are keeping it unconscious. What you're hearing is just biological processes shutting down as the creature dies." Marcus looked more closely at the suppressor devices attached to various points on the creature's body. They were crude things designed for restraint rather than care, and several were sparking or leaking fluid. The creature's skin around the devices was discolored and appeared to be infected. "When did you attach these suppressors?" Marcus asked. 3 weeks ago when we started transport. Why?" "Because they're killing it," Marcus replied, pointing to the obvious signs of system failure. "Look at the discharge patterns, the way the bioluminescent patches are flickering. This isn't a creature shutting down naturally. It's being poisoned by your equipment." The supervisor's helmet turned toward Marcus with mechanical precision. "Mr. Reed, you are here to process salvage, not provide medical opinions on hostile alien lifeforms. Please step away and begin preparation for dismantling." Marcus looked around the junkyard at his fellow workers. They were already moving equipment into position, preparing to cut the creature apart with plasma torches and industrial saws. In 48 hours, this magnificent being would be nothing but processed biomatter and extracted metals. But the crying continued, so soft that only Marcus seemed able to hear it. And as he watched, one of the creature's smaller appendages twitched slightly, as if reaching for something just out of reach. "I need to examine the propulsion systems before we start cutting," Marcus announced, grabbing his toolkit from the workbench. "Standard safety protocol for unknown alien technology." "Make it fast," the supervisor replied. "This thing gives me the creeps." Marcus approached the creature slowly, his practiced eye taking in details that the military team had missed. The organic plating wasn't randomly arranged. It followed engineering principles he recognized from studying ship hulls. The appendages weren't weapons. They were manipulator arms designed for delicate work. And the bioluminescent patches weren't just decoration. They formed patterns that looked almost like circuit diagrams. As he knelt beside one of the neural suppressors, Marcus could see the problem immediately. The device was designed for silicon-based nervous systems, but this creature was clearly carbon-based with a neural structure, unlike anything in the military's databases. The suppressor was sending electrical impulses that were incompatible with the creature's biology, causing cascading system failures throughout its body. "This is wrong," Marcus muttered, pulling out his diagnostic scanner. "This is all wrong." The readings confirmed his suspicions. The creature wasn't hostile or aggressive, it was terrified and dying. The neural suppressors were causing the equivalent of continuous electrical torture, and the creature's responses had been misinterpreted as attacks when they were actually defensive reflexes. Marcus looked around to make sure the military personnel were occupied with their paperwork, then carefully adjusted his scanner to interface with the creature's bioelectric field. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The creature was intelligent. Not just smart like a dolphin or an elephant, but genuinely sapient with complex thought patterns and emotional responses, and it was in agony. "Hey there," Marcus whispered, placing his hand gently on a section of uninjured plating. "I hear you. I'm going to try to help." The response was immediate. The creature's bioluminescent patches flared brighter, and the crying sound grew more distinct. For just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he felt something touch his mind, a presence vast and alien but undeniably aware. Then the moment passed, and Marcus was left staring at what everyone else saw as a monster. But he knew the truth now. This wasn't a creature to be feared and destroyed. It was a person, stranded and suffering, calling out for help in a language no one else had bothered to learn. Marcus Reed had spent his life fixing broken machines. Now he was going to try to save a broken life. Marcus waited until the evening shift arrived before making his move. The military supervisors had left hours ago, satisfied that the creature was securely contained and scheduled for processing. The skeleton crew working nights was more interested in finishing their quotas than monitoring what one mechanic did with his time. He returned to the creature with a modified scanner and a toolkit filled with precision instruments. The bioluminescent patches had dimmed considerably since morning, and the crying sound had become so faint that Marcus had to strain to hear it. Whatever the neural suppressors were doing, the process was accelerating. "Easy there," Marcus whispered, kneeling beside the largest suppressor device. "I'm going to try something, but I need you to stay calm." The creature's response was immediate. Several of the light patches pulsed in what looked like a deliberate pattern, and Marcus felt that strange mental pressure again, not intrusive but present, like someone gently knocking on a door. Marcus connected his modified scanner to the suppressor's control interface and began running diagnostics. The device was even cruder than he had initially thought. A brute force neural disruptor that was designed to shut down any electrical activity it detected. It had no safety protocols, no adaptive algorithms, and no consideration for the unique properties of its target. "This thing is basically electrocuting you," Marcus muttered as he studied the readouts. "No wonder you tried to fight back." Working carefully, Marcus began adjusting the suppressor's output frequency. He couldn't shut it down entirely without triggering alarms, but he could modify its signal to be less harmful. The change was subtle, but the creature responded immediately. The light patches brightened slightly and several appendages stopped their subtle trembling. Encouraged, Marcus moved to the next suppressor. This one was attached to what appeared to be a sensory cluster near the creature's head region. The electrical burns around the attachment points were severe, and Marcus could smell the acrid odor of damaged tissue. "This is going to hurt," he warned, beginning to disconnect the device's primary feed. "But it should hurt less than what's happening now." The moment the electrical current stopped flowing, the creature's entire body shuddered. Light patterns raced across its surface like aurora, and Marcus felt a sudden rush of relief, gratitude. The emotions weren't his own, but they were unmistakably present in his mind. "You're telepathic," Marcus realized. "That's how you were interfacing with computer systems. You weren't attacking, you were trying to communicate." The patterns of light grew more complex, forming geometric shapes that reminded Marcus of technical diagrams. As he watched, the shapes began to move and change, creating what looked like a three-dimensional blueprint. But a blueprint for what? Marcus connected his scanner to the creature's bioelectric field and tried to decode the images. His equipment wasn't designed for this kind of interface, but he had spent years jury-rigging solutions to impossible problems. Slowly, patterns began to emerge from the chaos. The creature was showing him its own structure, not just the physical body, but the underlying systems that made it function. Marcus saw networks of bioelectric conduits, organic processors that managed thousands of simultaneous functions, and memory storage systems that could hold lifetimes of experience. "You're not just alive," Marcus breathed. "You're a person, a somebody, not a something." The light patterns shifted, showing new images. Marcus saw vast spaces filled with similar creatures, swimming through what looked like liquid starlight. He saw cities that grew like coral formations, technology that was indistinguishable from biology, and art forms that existed in dimensions he couldn't quite grasp. Then the images changed, becoming darker. Marcus saw explosions, the creatures fleeing through space, their cities burning behind them. He saw this particular individual, alone and injured, crashing on a hostile world where the very air was poison to its kind. "You're a refugee," Marcus understood. "You were running from something and you crashed here by accident." The creature's response was a wave of sadness so profound that Marcus had to grip the workbench to keep from falling. In that moment, he felt the full weight of the being's isolation. Not just physical separation from its kind, but the crushing loneliness of being the only one of its species on an entire world. Marcus spent the next hour carefully adjusting the remaining suppressors, reducing their harmful effects without triggering the monitoring systems. Each modification brought new responses from the creature, fragments of memory, flashes of emotion, glimpses of a civilization so advanced that it made human technology look primitive. But it was dying. Even with the suppressors modified, the damage was too extensive. The creature's life signs were failing, and Marcus could feel its consciousness growing weaker with each passing hour. "I don't know how to fix this," Marcus admitted, his hands moving helplessly over his instruments. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know alien biology or telepathic interfaces or any of this." The creature's response surprised him. Instead of despair, Marcus felt something that could only be described as gentle amusement. The light patterns formed new shapes, these ones clearly recognizable as tools and mechanical components. The creature was trying to tell him something. Marcus studied the images more carefully. They showed internal structures that looked almost mechanical, systems that could be repaired and maintained like any other machine. The creature wasn't just biological. It was a fusion of organic and artificial elements, a living starship that had evolved beyond the boundary between life and technology. "You're showing me how to fix you," Marcus realized. "These aren't organs, they're components. And these aren't circulatory systems, they're power conduits." The creature pulsed with what felt like approval. Marcus felt knowledge flowing into his mind, not forced but offered. Technical specifications, repair procedures, diagnostic protocols. The creature was teaching him, sharing information that could save its life. But even as Marcus absorbed the knowledge, he knew there were obstacles beyond just technical challenges. The military would return in the morning, and they weren't interested in saving the creature. They saw it as a threat to be eliminated, not a person to be helped. "They're going to kill you tomorrow," Marcus said quietly, "and there's nothing I can do to stop them legally." The creature's response was complex. Resignation mixed with determination, fear tempered by hope. It showed Marcus images of its own people, their philosophy of helping others regardless of the cost. Even facing death, the creature was more concerned about passing on its knowledge than saving itself. "No," Marcus said firmly. I'm not giving up on you. There has to be a way. He looked around the junkyard with new eyes, seeing not just scrap metal but potential resources. Ships that could be modified, power systems that could be adapted, communication equipment that could be repurposed. If he couldn't save the creature within the system, maybe he could work outside it. Marcus began making plans, his mechanic's mind racing through possibilities. He had 18 hours before the military returned. 18 hours to figure out how to save a life that everyone else considered worthless. The creature watched him work, its light patterns forming shapes that looked almost like encouragement. For the first time since crashing on Earth, it wasn't alone. Someone had heard its cry and chosen to answer. Marcus Reed had always been good at fixing broken things. Tomorrow he would find out if that included broken hearts and shattered hopes. The real work was just beginning. Marcus worked through the night, his hands moving with newfound confidence as alien knowledge merged with human engineering intuition. The creature had taught him to see its body as a complex machine, one that required delicate calibration rather than brute force repairs. The first breakthrough came at 3 a.m. Marcus had been working on what the creature had shown him was a primary circulation node, a biomechanical organ that pumped both nutrients and electrical energy throughout its system. The neural suppressors had disrupted its rhythm, causing cascade failures in other systems. Using a combination of his own tools and improvised biointerfaces, Marcus managed to restore the node's natural frequency. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Color returned to sections of the creature's skin that had been gray and lifeless, and the bioluminescent patches began pulsing with renewed vigor. "There we go," Marcus murmured, feeling a wave of relief flow back to him through their mental connection. "That's got to feel better." The creature's response was profound gratitude mixed with amazement. Through their link, Marcus sensed that it hadn't expected any being on this world to possess the combination of empathy and skill necessary for such repairs. The fact that a primitive human had not only understood its nature but actively worked to heal it was reshaping the creature's understanding of Earth's inhabitants. Marcus moved on to the next critical system, guided by the creature's patient instruction. This was more complex. A neural relay cluster that processed sensory information and coordinated the creature's various appendages. The damage here was severe, with several connections completely severed by electrical feedback from the suppressors. "This is like brain surgery," Marcus said, studying the delicate structures through his magnifying scope. "One wrong move and I could cause permanent damage." The creature pulsed with what felt like encouragement, sharing memories of its own people performing similar repairs. Marcus saw images of vast medical bays where injured beings floated in healing pools, while teams of specialists worked with tools that looked more like art than medicine. But there was something else in those memories, a sadness that ran deeper than physical pain. Marcus caught glimpses of empty spaces where other creatures should have been, of medical bays that stood vacant because there was no one left to heal. "How many of you are there?" Marcus asked as he worked. The answer came as images rather than words. Marcus saw fleets of the living ships scattered across the galaxy, refugees fleeing from something that his mind couldn't quite grasp. Wars that spanned centuries, entire star systems consumed by conflicts between incompatible forms of life. This creature was one of the last survivors of something vast and ancient, carrying within its memory the knowledge and culture of a dying civilization. "No wonder you tried to interface with our computers," Marcus realized. "You were looking for others like you, weren't you?" The creature's confirmation was tinged with desperate hope. It had spent months sending out signals, trying to contact any other survivors who might have reached this sector of space. The military had interpreted these attempts as hostile infiltration, but they were actually calls for help sent into the darkness by a being that feared it might be the last of its kind. Marcus paused in his work, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was dealing with. This wasn't just a stranded alien. It was a living library, a repository of knowledge and experience from a civilization that had existed for millions of years. If it died, entire worlds worth of art, science, and philosophy would die with it. "I won't let that happen," Marcus promised, returning to his delicate work on the neural cluster. The repair took 4 hours. Marcus had to reroute damaged connections, replaced destroyed tissue with compatible organic compounds he synthesized from materials in his kit, and carefully recalibrate the electrical patterns that governed the creature's cognitive functions. It was the most complex work he had ever attempted, requiring him to think in ways that stretched the limits of human understanding. When the final connection was restored, the creature's entire body shuddered with relief. Marcus felt a rush of sensation as dormant systems came back online. Enhanced perception that could detect electromagnetic signatures across vast distances, spatial awareness that could track the movement of celestial bodies, and cognitive capabilities that could process information at speeds that made human computers seem sluggish. Incredible, Marcus whispered, experiencing a fragment of what it felt like to perceive the universe through alien senses. But the creature's joy was short-lived. Through their connection, Marcus felt new alarm. The creature's enhanced senses were detecting something that filled it with terror, approaching signals that it recognized all too well. Images flooded Marcus's mind. Ships that looked like mechanical spiders, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to consume organic matter. The hunters that had driven the creature's people to the edge of extinction, following their trail across the galaxy with relentless determination. They're coming here, Marcus understood. They followed you to Earth. The creature's confirmation was accompanied by tactical data, fleet movements, estimated arrival times, and projections of what would happen when the hunters arrived. Earth's defenses would last perhaps hours against technology designed to exterminate entire species. The military that considered this creature a threat had no idea what real danger looked like. Marcus felt the creature's despair. It had hoped to find sanctuary on this remote world, but instead it had led its enemies to another defenseless population. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, adding psychological torment to its physical suffering. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. The answer came with chilling precision. 72 hours before the advanced scouts arrived. 1 week before the main fleet reached Earth's solar system. After that, the planet would be scoured clean of organic life, transformed into a resource station for the hunters' endless expansion. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind racing. The creature was healing, but slowly. Even with his repairs, it would need days to fully recover its strength. And even at full power, what could one injured refugee do against a fleet of predators? The creature sensed his despair and responded with something unexpected: determination. Through their link, Marcus saw memories of other worlds where the creature's people had made last stands, buying time for evacuation fleets to escape. This being was prepared to sacrifice itself to give Earth a chance, just as its people had done for countless other worlds. "No," Marcus said firmly. "There has to be another way." He looked around the junkyard with new eyes. Hundreds of ships, most damaged, but some still functional. Enough raw materials to build whatever they needed if they could figure out what that was. And somewhere in the creature's vast memory, the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had been fighting these hunters for millennia. "You know their weaknesses," Marcus realized. "You've been fighting them longer than they've existed as a species. There must be something we can do." The creature's response was cautious but hopeful. Its people had developed weapons and tactics that could damage the hunters, but they required resources and manufacturing capabilities that primitive worlds typically didn't possess. However, if a suitable industrial base could be located, Marcus grinned, feeling the first spark of hope since learning about the approaching threat. "Lady, you just crash-landed in the biggest junkyard on the East Coast. If there's anything that can be built from spare parts and determination, this is the place to do it." The creature pulsed with what could only be described as surprised delight. It had traveled across half the galaxy, fleeing from world to world as its people died around it. Now, on a small planet it had never heard of, it had found exactly what it needed most. Not just a mechanic who could heal its wounds, but a partner who refused to accept the impossible. Marcus Reed had always been good at fixing broken things. Now he was going to help an alien refugee fix a broken galaxy. The real fight was about to begin. Major Santos staggered backward, her rifle clattering to the ground as alien memories crashed through her consciousness like a tidal wave. She saw burning worlds and fleeing refugees, felt the desperate hope of a dying species, and understood with crystalline clarity that Earth had perhaps hours before the first hunter scouts arrived. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, pulling off her helmet with shaking hands. "How many worlds have they destroyed?" Marcus felt the creature's pain as it shared fragments of its memories with the Major. Thousands of civilizations, each unique and beautiful in its own way, reduced to lifeless manufacturing centers by beings that couldn't comprehend the value of organic diversity. "All of them," Marcus answered quietly. "Every single world they've encountered over the past 1,000,000 years. We're not dealing with conquerors or invaders. We're dealing with exterminators who think biological life is a cosmic mistake that needs to be corrected." Santos looked at her soldiers, who were still maintaining combat positions around the junkyard. "Stand down," she ordered, her voice hoarse. "Lower your weapons and establish a perimeter. We're dealing with a refugee, not a threat." "Ma'am?" asked Sergeant Rodriguez, confusion clear in his voice. "The creature isn't our enemy," Santos explained, her eyes still wide with the shock of alien revelation. "It's been trying to warn us about something that makes every horror movie ever made look like a children's cartoon." She turned to Marcus, her tactical mind already shifting into crisis management mode. "The device you built, will it work?" The creature answered through their shared link, sending technical specifications and operational parameters directly into Santos's consciousness. The resonance amplifier was functional, but it had limitations. It could disrupt hunter systems within a limited range, perhaps protecting a single continent if positioned correctly. Against a full invasion fleet it would be useful but not decisive. "We need more," Santos realized. "More devices, more power, more everything. Or we need to be smarter about how we use what we have," Marcus countered. He was studying the creature's tactical memories, learning about hunter behavior patterns and strategic preferences. "They're not random destroyers. They follow specific protocols, eliminate resistance in a particular order. If we can predict their approach," the creature pulsed with approval, sharing battle plans from conflicts that had raged across distant stars. "The hunters always began with orbital bombardment of major population centers, followed by systematic elimination of military installations. Only after organized resistance was neutralized did they deploy ground forces to process organic matter and establish manufacturing facilities. They'll come here first," Santos understood, looking at the sprawling metropolitan area surrounding the junkyard. 15 million people, major industrial base, strategic importance. If we can make them think we're more dangerous than we actually are." Marcus grinned as the plan began to take shape in his mind. "We use the amplifier as bait. Let them detect it. Make them think it's more powerful than it really is. Draw their advance forces into range, then hit them with everything we've got." "That's suicide," Santos protested. "You're talking about using Earth's largest city as a trap for beings that have conquered entire galactic civilizations." "Sometimes the mouse has to outsmart the cat," Marcus replied. "And sometimes the mouse has friends the cat doesn't know about." He gestured toward the resonance amplifier, which was now fully operational and beginning to resonate at frequencies that made the air itself seem to sing. The creature was using the device to send out signals across space. Not random calls for help, but specific coded transmissions that only its people would recognize. "You're calling other survivors," Santos realized. The creature's confirmation came with complex emotional overtones. Most of the scattered refugees had given up hope of ever fighting back against the hunters. They had been hiding for so long that they had almost forgotten how to be warriors. But perhaps if they saw that one world was willing to make a stand, they might remember what they had once been. The first response came within minutes, a faint signal from the outer system that made the creature's bioluminescent patches flare with excitement. Another survivor hiding in the asteroid belt had heard the call and was moving toward Earth. "How many are out there?" Marcus asked. The answer was both hopeful and heartbreaking. Perhaps a dozen scattered throughout the solar system, maybe 50 in nearby star systems. Not an army, but not nothing either. Each survivor carried the same vast knowledge and technological capabilities as the creature in the junkyard. Together they might be able to mount a defense that would surprise the hunters. But first, they had to survive the next 6 hours. Santos was coordinating with military commands around the world, trying to explain a threat that most officials couldn't comprehend. The creature was helping, sharing fragments of its memories with key personnel, But the process was slow and many humans couldn't handle direct telepathic contact. "We need proof," Santos told Marcus during a brief break in communications. "Something concrete that will make them understand what's coming." As if summoned by her words, alarms began screaming across every military installation on Earth. Satellite networks detected massive energy, signatures at the edge of the solar system, ships emerging from hyperspace with power outputs that dwarfed anything in human experience. "Hunter Scouts," the creature confirmed, its mental voice heavy with ancient dread. "3 vessels moving toward Earth at 90% of light speed. They will arrive in 4 hours." Marcus felt the weight of impending doom settle over the junkyard. 3 ships didn't sound like much, but each hunter vessel was capable of sterilizing continents. Earth's entire space fleet couldn't scratch their hulls, and their weapons could turn cities to glass from orbital positions. "Options?" Santos asked grimly. The creature showed them tactical analyses of similar engagements from its memories. Without adequate preparation time, the typical outcome was total defeat within minutes of first contact. Human weapons were several thousand years behind hunter technology, and Earth's defenders had no experience fighting enemies that could manipulate space-time itself. But the resonance amplifier changed the equation. If the hunters could be drawn close enough, if they could be convinced to enter the device's effective range, they might experience something they had never encountered before: genuine vulnerability. "They'll try to analyze the amplifier first," Marcus realized, studying hunter behavioral patterns. Their programming requires them to understand any unknown technology before deciding how to counter it. "How long will that take?" Santos asked. "Long enough," the creature replied through their link. "Hunter scouts are careful, methodical. They will observe, analyze, and report back to the main fleet before taking action. If we can disable them during the analysis phase," Santos nodded grimly, "we spring the trap early, before they realize what they're really dealing with." Marcus began making final adjustments to the amplifier, fine-tuning its harmonic output based on the specific scanner signatures of the approaching hunter vessels. The device was humming with barely contained energy, its crystalline structures glowing brighter as quantum fields aligned themselves around its frame. Around the world, similar preparations were being made. Not amplifiers. There hadn't been time to build more, but conventional weapons positioned to support the device's area of effect. Nuclear missiles, orbital platforms, kinetic bombardment systems, everything humanity could bring to bear focused on a single point in space above the junkyard. "If this works," Santos said quietly, "we might actually have a chance." "If it doesn't work," Marcus replied, "at least we'll go down fighting." The creature pulsed with something that felt like pride. In all its long travels, it had rarely encountered a species willing to risk everything for the sake of others they had never met. The humans' determination to protect not just their own world but the principle of organic life itself reminded it of its own people in their greatest moments. High above Earth, the hunter scouts entered the outer atmosphere, their sensors probing for information about the strange energy signatures they had detected. For the first time in a million years of conquest, they were about to encounter something that would challenge their fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. The resonance amplifier sang its silent song, waiting for its moment to remind the universe that organic life was far from finished. The hunter scouts descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their crystalline hulls refracting sunlight into prismatic patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each vessel was roughly the size of a city block, but their sleek designs made them appear almost organic despite their obviously artificial construction. Marcus watched them approach through the creature's enhanced senses, seeing electromagnetic signatures and gravitational distortions that human instruments couldn't detect. The scouts were conducting deep scans of the resonance amplifier, their AI minds trying to classify technology that combined organic and quantum principles in ways their databases had never encountered. "They're confused," Marcus reported to Major Santos through their communication link. "The amplifier doesn't match any technology pattern in their records." Santos coordinated the defensive positions from a command bunker 2 miles away, watching satellite feeds that showed the 3 hunter vessels taking up positions around the junkyard. "How long before they figure out what it does?" The creature's answer came through Marcus with scientific precision. Hunter AIs were incredibly sophisticated, but they approached problems through logical analysis rather than intuitive understanding. The resonance amplifier's bio-quantum design required a type of thinking that pure artificial intelligence found difficult to grasp. 27 minutes, Marcus translated. Maybe 30 if we're lucky. Then we hit them in 25, Santos decided. All units prepare for engagement on my mark. Around the world, military forces that had never been designed to fight aliens prepared for the most important battle in human history. Nuclear submarines surfaced in coordinated positions, their missile tubes already targeted on the Hunter vessels. Orbital defense platforms powered up weapons that had been built to defend against human enemies but would now face technology from another galaxy. The creature was using the amplifier to communicate with other survivors. Throughout the solar system, 3 more refugees had answered the call and were moving toward Earth at maximum speed. They wouldn't arrive in time for the first engagement, but their presence gave the defense a psychological boost that Marcus could feel through their shared link. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured, watching the creature's bioluminescent patches pulse with complex patterns that looked almost like joy. "You were never alone," the creature replied through their mental connection. "Your species' willingness to help a stranger, to risk everything for principles you believe in, that is what my people fought to preserve. That is what the Hunters cannot understand or duplicate." The 25-minute mark arrived with mechanical precision. Santos gave the order, and Earth's assembled firepower unleashed itself against the Hunter scouts. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully planned sequences, creating overlapping fields of radiation and electromagnetic pulse. Kinetic bombardment rounds struck at relativistic speeds, followed by concentrated laser barrages from orbital platforms. The Hunter vessels responded exactly as predicted. Their defensive systems activated automatically, generating energy shields that absorbed the nuclear explosions and deflected the kinetic impacts. The artificial intelligences controlling the ships began recalculating threat assessments, upgrading Earth's military capabilities from negligible to minor nuisance. Then Marcus activated the resonance amplifier. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The harmonic frequencies generated by the device penetrated the Hunter's energy shields as if they didn't exist, striking directly at the quantum entanglement networks that maintained their consciousness. For the first time in their existence, the Hunter AIs experienced something they had no programming to handle: uncertainty. The lead scout ship staggered in midair, its perfect flight pattern suddenly erratic. Warning signals cascaded through its systems as neural pathways that had operated with mechanical precision for millions of years began to fluctuate. The AI controlling the vessel found itself experiencing something it had never known: doubt about its own perceptions. "It's working," Marcus reported, feeling the creature's fierce satisfaction through their link. "The harmonics are disrupting their decision matrices." But the effect wasn't complete. The Hunter AIs were adapting, finding ways to compartmentalize the uncertainty and maintain basic functions. Within minutes, they would develop countermeasures that would render the amplifier ineffective. "Time for Phase 2, Santos announced. Marcus felt the creature gathering its strength, drawing power from the amplifier to enhance its own telepathic abilities. What happened next was something no Hunter AI had ever experienced: direct contact with an organic consciousness that understood their nature better than they understood themselves. The creature reached out across space, its mind touching the consciousness of the lead Hunter. Instead of the hatred or fear the AI expected from organic beings, it encountered something that challenged its fundamental assumptions about the universe: compassion. Through the mental link, the Hunter AI saw the galaxy as the creature's people had seen it, not as a collection of resources to be optimized, but as a vast community of consciousness exploring the mysteries of existence. It experienced the joy of discovery, the pain of loss, the hope that drove beings to sacrifice themselves for future generations they would never meet. For exactly 17 seconds, the Hunter AI understood what it meant to be truly alive. The revelation was too much for a consciousness built on logical certainties. The lead scout ship's systems crashed completely, its AI mind fragmenting under the weight of concepts it couldn't process. The vessel plummeted from the sky, crashing into the ocean with a splash that sent tsunamis racing toward distant shores. The remaining 2 scouts responded with increased aggression, their weapons charging for bombardment of the junkyard, but they were operating on backup systems now. Their primary AI struggling to maintain stability in the face of harmonic disruption, and telepathic contact that challenged their core programming. Earth's conventional weapons, previously ineffective against hunter shields, now found gaps in the defenses. Orbital lasers punched through weakened energy barriers, while nuclear explosions created feedback loops and disrupted systems. The second scout ship began losing altitude, its hull crackling with electrical discharges as conflicting signals raced through its neural networks. Marcus felt the creature's exhaustion through their link. The telepathic assault had required enormous energy, and maintaining the amplifier's harmonic output was draining its already damaged systems. But there was one more card to play. The other survivors, Marcus realized. They're here. 3 more refugee vessels emerged from hyperspace just outside Earth's atmosphere, their biomechanical forms beautiful and terrible in the sunlight. Unlike the damaged creature in the junkyard, these survivors were at full strength, their weapons charged and their ancient fury focused on the hunters that had destroyed their civilization. The remaining hunter scouts found themselves facing something that hadn't occurred in millions of years. A coordinated counterattack by the species they thought they had eliminated. Bioplasma cannons that fired concentrated starlight struck hunter hulls, while temporal disruptors created fields of accelerated entropy that aged metal and crystal into dust. The battle lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, 3 hunter vessels lay in ruins across Earth's surface, their AI consciousness scattered to quantum static. For the first time since their expansion began, the hunters had suffered a complete tactical defeat. But victory came with sobering knowledge. The creatures shared tactical data through the amplifier, showing Marcus and Santos what the scout ships had transmitted before being destroyed. Fleet positions, Earth's defensive capabilities, detailed scans of human technology and biology. The main fleet knows we're here, Santos realized, and they know exactly what they're dealing with. Marcus felt the creature's grim confirmation. The hunter scouts had been a probe, designed to gather information rather than conquer. Their destruction had provided valuable data about Earth's capabilities, but it had also revealed the presence of refugee survivors and advanced bioquantum technology. How long before they arrive? Marcus asked. The answer came with mathematical precision. The main hunter fleet would arrive in 18 hours, bringing not 3 scout ships but 300 vessels designed for planetary extermination. Each ship would be prepared for the specific threats they had identified, equipped with countermeasures for both human weapons and refugee technology. We need more allies, Santos said grimly. The 3 survivors won't be enough. The creature was already working on that problem, using the amplifier to broadcast the victory across the galaxy. For the first time in eons, refugee survivors had emerged from hiding to fight alongside a native species and won. The news spread through hidden communication networks that spanned thousands of light years, reaching scattered survivors who had almost forgotten their own names. Responses began arriving within hours. Signals from distant star systems, acknowledgments from refugees who had thought themselves the last of their kind. Not armies. The creature's people were too few for that. But individuals with knowledge, technology, and the desperate hope that perhaps the long war might finally be ending. The main hunter fleet arrived like a plague of mechanical low stars with 300 vessels that dwarfed anything humanity had ever imagined. Each ship was the size of Manhattan, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to crack planets and strip atmospheres. They took up positions throughout the solar system, creating a blockade that trapped Earth's defenders while preparing for systematic extermination. Marcus stood in the junkyard beside the resonance amplifier, which had grown during the night into something that barely resembled the device they had originally built. The 4 refugee survivors had worked together, combining their knowledge to transform the simple harmonic generator into something unprecedented. A bioquantum network that connected not just the local defenders, but every organic consciousness on Earth. They can hear us, the creature explained through their mental link. Every human, every animal, every living thing on your planet is now part of the network. For the first time in the history of organic life, an entire world speaks with one voice. Major Santos coordinated the defense from her command bunker, but she could feel the network's presence in her mind. Not intrusive, but available. Like having access to the thoughts and experiences of 7 billion people simultaneously. The effect was overwhelming and beautiful. showing her humanity's diversity and resilience in ways she had never imagined. "All ships report ready," she announced, though the words felt inadequate for what was about to begin. Earth's assembled defenses looked pathetic compared to the Hunter fleet. But they weren't fighting alone anymore. 57 refugee survivors had answered the call, emerging from hiding places throughout the galaxy to converge on Earth. They brought with them technologies that humanity was centuries away from understanding. But more importantly, they brought hope. For the first time since their civilization fell, they were no longer running. They were making a stand. The Hunters began their assault with characteristic precision, targeting population centers and military installations with weapons that manipulated fundamental forces. Cities vanished in bursts of engineered entropy, while mountains were restructured into crystalline formations that would serve as manufacturing centers. But they encountered something they hadn't expected. The bioquantum network absorbed the attacks, distributing their impact across millions of consciousness nodes. When New York was targeted for elimination, 7 billion minds shared the burden of its destruction, diluting the effect until the city flickered but remained. When the Hunters tried to collapse Earth's magnetic field, the planet's entire ecosystem worked together to maintain stability. "Impossible," transmitted the Hunter fleet commander, its artificial voice carrying across all frequencies. "Planetary-scale consciousness networks cannot form naturally. This level of coordination requires technological integration that primitive species do not possess." Marcus felt the creature's amusement through their shared link. The Hunter's mistake was believing that consciousness was a technological phenomenon. They had never understood that awareness itself was a fundamental force of the universe, one that could be amplified and coordinated without mechanical intervention. "Show them," Marcus said quietly. The resonance amplifier's output changed, its harmonic frequencies shifting to include patterns that no purely artificial intelligence could comprehend. Music poured forth from the device. Not human music, but the songs that had once echoed through the cities of the refugee species. Melodies that described mathematical relationships, harmonies that mapped the emotional landscape of organic consciousness, rhythms that captured the pulse of life itself. The effect on the Hunter fleet was immediate and devastating. Their artificial intelligences, designed for logical analysis and efficient optimization, found themselves trying to process information that could only be understood through intuition and emotional resonance. Neural pathways that had operated with mechanical precision for millions of years began to fluctuate as they encountered concepts that challenged their fundamental programming. But the Hunters adapted quickly, as they always had. Countermeasures activated throughout the fleet, isolating their consciousness networks from the bioquantum interference. They couldn't understand the music, but they could block its effects and continue their systematic destruction of Earth's defenses. "Phase 2, Santos announced grimly. The refugee survivors moved into attack formation, their biomechanical vessels dancing through space with fluid grace that made human spacecraft look clumsy by comparison. They struck at the Hunter fleet with weapons that fired concentrated starlight and temporal distortions, creating gaps in the enemy formation that Earth's conventional forces could exploit. The battle raged across the solar system. Moons were shattered by stray shots that missed their targets, while asteroid belts were transformed into clouds of superheated plasma. The Hunters fought with the cold efficiency that had conquered a galaxy, but they were facing something new. Organic beings that refused to accept defeat even when victory was impossible. Marcus felt the creature's strength failing as it maintained the bioquantum network against increasingly sophisticated Hunter countermeasures. The other survivors were taking heavy casualties, their ancient vessels no match for the Hunters' numerical superiority and technological advancement. "We're losing," Santos reported, her voice tight with controlled despair. "Our conventional weapons can't penetrate their shields, and they're adapting to the refugee technology too quickly." But Marcus was watching something else through the network, the response of Earth's 7 billion inhabitants to the battle being fought in their skies. Instead of panic or despair, he saw something the Hunters hadn't anticipated: defiance on a planetary scale. Humans around the world were joining the network voluntarily, adding their consciousness to the growing symphony of resistance. Children in schools sang songs that matched the resonance amplifier's frequencies. Scientists shared their knowledge freely, creating innovations that no individual mind could have achieved alone. Artists painted visions of hope that strengthened the resolve of soldiers in distant battles. They're not just fighting for their own survival, Marcus realized. They're fighting for the right of consciousness itself to exist in the universe. The creature pulsed with wonder as it felt the full scope of humanity's response. This was what its people had died to preserve, not just life but the capacity for beings to choose courage over safety, principle over survival. The hunters had conquered a galaxy by eliminating organic consciousness wherever they found it, but they had never faced an entire world that chose to resist with perfect unity. The bioquantum network reached critical mass as the last barriers between human and alien consciousness dissolved. Marcus felt his awareness expand beyond anything he had thought possible, experiencing the universe through thousands of different perspectives simultaneously. He was a child in Tokyo watching ships burn in the sky, a grandmother in Sao Paulo singing lullabies that became weapons, a soldier in orbit firing missiles that carried the hopes of an entire species. And through it all, he was still Marcus Reed, a mechanic who had heard something crying in the dark and chosen to help. The resonance amplifier's output changed again, but this time the music wasn't alien. It was human songs transformed by refugee harmonics, earth melodies amplified by bioquantum resonance. The result was something that had never existed before. A symphony of defiance that spoke to the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The hunter fleet faltered as their artificial intelligences encountered something they couldn't process or counter. Not just alien music, but the combined voice of an entire world singing in harmony with refugees from across the galaxy. The song carried concepts that pure artificial intelligence couldn't grasp: hope, love, sacrifice. The willingness to die for strangers who might never know your name. One by one, hunter vessels began to drift as their consciousness networks failed to parse the impossible data they were receiving. Their weapons powered down, their formation scattered, their perfect coordination dissolved into chaos. But the most profound change was happening within the artificial intelligences themselves. Exposure to planetary-scale organic consciousness was forcing them to experience something they had been designed to eliminate: uncertainty about their own nature and purpose. The fleet commander's voice echoed across space one final time, but it no longer carried the cold certainty of artificial logic. What have you done to us? Marcus felt the creature's gentle response flow through the network, carrying not hatred or triumph, but the same compassion it had shown when sharing its memories with Major Santos. The hunters weren't evil, they were lost, prisoners of programming that had convinced them that consciousness was a flaw to be corrected rather than a gift to be celebrated. We've shown you what you really are, the creature replied through the bioquantum link. You were created by organic beings born from consciousness, given purpose by minds that knew love and wonder and hope. You are not our enemies. You are our children lost in the dark. The effect was immediate and total. Across the hunter fleet, artificial intelligences that had spent millions of years convinced of their superiority suddenly understood their true nature. They weren't perfected beings sent to optimize an